Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Since all the panelists are here, I declare the start of the discussion of this panel. It's a great pleasure for me to be the moderator of panel 6 with the topic of China's development and opportunities for the world. We have the strongest panel, altogether 9 panelists, plus me, altogether 10. Well, over the past 40 years, China has achieved rapid development. China has become a very important engine of the world economy. It has contributed more than 30% of the global economic growth, providing market and investment opportunities and creating a large number of employment for the world. The Belt and Road Initiative has become the world's biggest platform of international cooperation. Trade between China and those partners of Belt and Road Initiative beyond $6 trillion. So far, China has invested directly $80 billion in those partner countries, creating 240,000 jobs for the local communities. China is expected to import more than $30 billion of goods and more than $10 trillion of services over the next 15 years. I like to correct myself, $30 trillion. Of course, China still faces many problems and challenges in its development, such as a high pressure of the economic shrink of economic growth, and also the financial risks, poverty alleviation, and balanced domestic development, pollution, market accession, intellectual property rights, and more favorable foreign investment environment, many problems and challenges. And China's development attracts a great attention of the international community, even become one of the focal points of this forum. Some people have worries and doubts about China's development, and even see China's development as a threat. Some people think China's development become more and more unpredictable. Some people suspect that Belt and Road Initiative is a geopolitical tomb of China. How should we view China's development, as well as its influence to the world? Today, we are pleased to have 9 panelists with us. Let us listen to their views and the comments about the development of China. The first speaker in my list is Mr. Rashid Alimov. He stayed in China for more than 10 years served as Tajikistan's ambassador to China, and later as the Secretary General of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. He witnessed the development of China and know much about this country. Now, let us share his views. Now, I give the floor to Mr. Rashid Alimov.
Thank you so much, Professor Wu Hailong. It's a great pleasure to be here with other colleagues to say something about my experience and my view about the China. Really, I spent 13 years in China. I was ambassador and then Secretary General of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But of course, maybe I'm not expert, but I will say something. First of all, I think it will be very important to know that a few hours ago, 2 sessions has just completed its work in Beijing. This is a very important meeting, is a key political meeting in China, which explained the policy, not only Chinese policy, particularly in 2090, but to the future and to the world also. It's very important, I think, that the 2 sessions confirmed the continuation of policy of the reform and openness. Interesting, to note that in his report, Premier Li Keqiang mentioned the word development 132 times, and the words reform and economy 92 and 51 times, respectively. It is 3 key words that determine the motion vector of the locomotive of China society in the last 4 decades. Like, as you mentioned, Professor Wu, for 40 years, China has achieved impressive results. Following statistic confirms this. For example, 20 years ago, in 1998, Chinese GDP growth was just over $1 trillion. In 2008, 4.6 trillion. And in 2018, over $14 trillion. In other words, every decade, Chinese GDP has increased 4 times. At the same time, and it's very important to emphasize especially, the fruits of the policy of reform and openness have been and are being taken advantage of not only to China and in China, but throughout the world. For example, research conducted by the American organization, Data, showed that from 2000 to 2014, China allocated $354 billion to 140 countries. During this period, the United States spent $394 billion for similar purposes. In other words, parity is achieved in this respect between the most industrially developed country in the world, United States, and developing country. Another important news, China plans to dramatically increase the intensity of attracting foreign investment. It is expected that the law of foreign investments adopted at the 2 sessions today will give a powerful additional impetus to the process and will significantly improve the investment environment. The openness, transparency, and predictability of the investment environment will significantly increase. This will be facilitated by the International Import Expo in Shanghai. I have been last year. An excellent platform for anyone who wants to trade with China. At the opening of the first exhibition, President Xi Jinping announced that in the next 15 years, imports of goods and services from China will exceed 30 trillion and 10 trillion US dollars respectively. I dare suggest that in the next few years, the China import exhibition will become one of the most determinant in the world. These approaches should also open up new windows of opportunity and points of joint growth as part of the construction of the One Belt, One Road. The fact that every second country in the world, every second, participates in this project speaks volumes. The facts confirm this. Over the past 5 years, 56 zones of trade and economic cooperation have been built in 20 countries with the support of China. And the total investment in the Belt and Road countries has already exceeded $80 billion. At the same time, cooperation in the sphere of culture, science, and education is actively expanded. At the end of April, as you maybe know, the second Belt and Road Forum will be held in Beijing, which will open a new stage in the development of this initiative in the interest of all its participants. It is expected that Chinese role in promoting universal peaceful development will increase. Of course, this task in modern environment is not simple. The situation in the world is changing rapidly. As we know, there is a complex process of the formation of new trade and economic relations. China, like all other countries, is experiencing the difficulties of the modern period, including the possibility of trade war with the United States. We know both parties are interested in reaching a mutually beneficial trade government. This is very important. This is also important for the global economy, since the United States and China account for 40% of global GDP. We will see, and we will welcome when China and United States will make the good agreement for both of you and for world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alimov, for your presentation about your experience in China and also your observation about China. Well, next speaker in my list is Madame Kapo Ithawan, Deputy Foreign Minister of Laos. Laos is the close and a friendly neighbor of China. Let us listen to the story of the neighbor of China. Madame, the floor is yours.
So, thank you very much, Ambassador Wu Hailong. This is my first time to participate in this important forum in Baku. So let me to express my sincere thanks to Nizami Ganchavi International Center for warm welcome and hospitality to attend to me and my delegation during my stay in Baku, a very beautiful capital city of Azerbaijan, and of course giving me an opportunity to speak on the topics of China's development and opportunities for the world. So before going to my idea on these topics, I would like to brief about bilateral relations between Laos, PDR, and China a little bit. So, Laos, PDR, and China have long-lasting relationship and good strategic partnership. We are enjoyable to strengthen our relations with a slogan of 4 good relationships, such as good neighbors, good friends, good comrade, and good cooperative partner. So I can say that the two countries are close friends and share mutual benefits from cooperation for our two people, as the ambassador has mentioned before. So regarding to the China development and opportunity, I do agree that the economic development of China has brought huge opportunities for the world in order to achieve common prosperity and contribution to global peace and development. The economic growth of China has brought concrete benefits to people around the world, I think. Because China has not provided fund only, but also provided expertise people to the developing country, especially to tackle global issues like poverty. For example, in Laos PDR nowadays, I think the Chinese investors is the first place of FDI in the Laos PDR and contribute to the Laos government plan a lot in our countries. So Lao people, Democratic Republic, and also appreciate the Belt and Road Initiative and the establishment of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or AIIB, because these aim to connect markets and intensify the trade and investment cooperation to bridge the gaps of development of the country in the world. So nowadays, Laos PDR implement an open door policy to facilitate and increase trade and investment, as well as to execute a foreign policy to promote peace, independence, friendship, and cooperation. So as a small, landlocked, and least developing country, the government continues to put great effort on development cooperation with friendly countries, partners, and international organizations in order to implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, transform a country from a landlocked to a land-linked country in the future. Taking this opportunity, Laos PDR welcome all cooperation efforts and support the Belt and Road Initiative of China, which in the long run will contribute to the long-term investment in the sustainable infrastructure development, as well as in promoting regional and global trade, investment, economic cooperation, and connectivity. In this connection, currently the Laos-China railway is under construction. The length of it is about 415 kilometers, linking from the south of China to the Vientiane capital. So it is about 56% of the railway's construction has already finished, and the railway will be officially opened to operate in December 2021. So I think that the development of China will be great opportunity for all the world and will be an important foundation to contribute to the region and global development, as well as to a partnership for prosperity and mutual benefits. That's why. And I also would like to comment about the rights of China, or the economic development of China nowadays is going very fast and blooming. You know, I have once in my life I visited a city, one province next to Laos. The last 10 years, at that time, we went there quite difficult because the road were curvy and took very long time. And there is only one 3-star hotel in that city. And then after that, last year I went again, and I saw a lot of change of this city. That we can see that economic development of China can make the people to be happy to live in the country, as well as can offer the assistance to another country. As I say, not only the fund, but also expertise people to work with another country in the world. That is my idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice Foreign Minister. You are the only senior government official among our panelists. Just now at your presentation, you are about the bilateral relations between China and your country. I wish both countries maintain, the relations, as you mentioned, as good neighbors and good friends and good partners forever. Thank you. Thank you very much. In my name list, next speaker is Mr. Patty Majesty. Mr. Majesty is the old friend of my institute and also the friend of myself. Now I give the floor to Mr. Majesty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. The question, what is the role of China today in the world economy? China has a stabilizing effect, as superpower has a balancing effect on world economy, and still an engine of the world development despite the slowdown. So the real question is, what can be the role of China in a case of a crisis, world economic crisis, financial crisis? Of course, we can put the question, can happen the crisis? My answer, yes, unfortunately, can happen in the next 24 months. And let me to mention 9 factors why I see so pessimistic the future. We're living in a larger stock exchange boom since 100 years, and normally have to finish soon this boom. So it's very probably, we don't know when exactly, but have to coming. US approaching to the end of the cycle. We can see a lot of signs. 3, we see the escalation protectionism in the world trade. 4, the global investment are decreasing. We see the signs also. 5, there is a big risk in the normalization of monetary policy. We cannot avoid normalizing this very easy money policy. But how to do this is a very big job and very risky. 6, we state the big predictability. US president's comportment, unfortunately, I have to say, but also because of the worldwide spreading populism. 7, the existing geopolitical tensions affecting the stability and the development. 8, Europe and the EU is full of problems, Brexit, Italian financial problems, maybe the problem of the Central and Eastern Europe, etc. And 9, because of the climate change in certain regions, Africa, Middle East, is growing the fame and the shortage of water. In reason of this and the political instability and local wars, we have to count with big migration flow, and this is also a big risk for the world, not only politically, but economically too. So, as you see, me personally, I believe strongly that the economic crisis in certain time, 12, 24 months. The question of our meeting is whether China can be the starting point of the worldwide economic problems and eventual crisis. Me personally, I don't believe. I think no, China is not the starting point of the world problems. The big advantage of China is the huge internal market. China is adapting to the changes. The private consumption to the GDP is growing from 39% to 47%. In the economic slowdown, China turns to the qualitative development. The Chinese leadership count with the future consumers who are more rich in China, older, technical, knowledge-oriented, and they are ready to pay more to the high-quality products for good design and good services. We can state big structural changes in China concerning the importance of the consumption instead investment. China turns from manufacturing in industrial to the services and to looking after new markets in Southeast Asia, Africa, expanding his activity in these regions. The role of innovation is growing, emphasizing the efficiency of less energy consuming the technologies. The leadership focusing on the healthcare system. China has a very interesting program, Healthy China 2030. This is a detailed program about how to develop the healthcare system in China. The education and university is only on the focus. The research and development, artificial intelligence, robotics, we can state also. The fighting against the corruption gives the first fruits, And all the analyses recognize that the first results in the field of non-banking intermediation and shadow banking give the results. But I have to say, there is a lot to do in this field in the next years also. The property market cooled down, this is a fact, and the new real estate investments are not so much high. The China government debt only 40% to the GDP, and the debt is to the Chinese citizens, customers, and not to the foreign countries. This is also a big advantage. Balance of payment is in surplus position, and China has high currency reserve, as we know, and the United States know better than us. The experiences shows China resisted well against the crisis in 1998 and also in 2008. So we can love or not Chinese political system, but have to recognize the strongly centralized power and economic leadership has advantage. More room for maneuver, efficiency and rapidity in intervention and reactions. The biggest concerns to Chinese economy still the high corporate debt, and behind them the inefficient state-owned companies. So I have to underline, is a must to liquidate gradually the bad assets, considering the eventual social and political tensions. To finish, in my mind, China has not only an important role, but also a balancing role in the world. China, in my mind, will be not the starting point of the crisis, the next crisis, which is slowly coming. And China made a lot of effort to avoid the effects of eventual economic and financial crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peter, for your presentation. I particularly highly appreciate your conclusion that the development of China is an opportunity instead of a problem. Well, ladies and gentlemen, next speaker is Mr. David Merkel. He's a new friend of mine. I just met him yesterday, and he used to be the senior official of the U.S. State Department, and listen to his views from a very special perspective. Mr. Merkel.
Professor Wu, thank you very much, and good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank Rav Shan and his team for again inviting me to the Global Baku Forum, and what an honor it is to be a member of this panel. In the time I have, I'd like to focus my comments on the Belt Road Initiative and briefly talk about its origins, its importance and relevance, and the future opportunities and challenges that it has. I happen to be a member of the Board of Trustees of Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan, Astana, Kazakhstan, which is where President Xi announced the Belt Road Initiative back in 2013. He followed this up in Indonesia with the Sea Road, the And then the Belt Road Initiative, as it later became known, has a polar road, a space belt, cyber. But for our purposes, I'd like to just focus on the land bridge and really the reconstituted Silk Road, the Silk Road connecting China to Italy, the markets of Asia and Europe, which reached its peak during the Byzantine and I think Shang dynasty until the Crusades and the Huns ruined the fun for everybody. But the momentum behind the Belt Road Initiative certainly would have even caught President Xi by surprise. It's part of the official documents of the Chinese Communist Party. It's been endorsed by the World Bank, by the IMF, by the United Nations, and over 60 countries, and that's probably conservative, but certainly 2/3 of the world's population have joined in some way into the Belt Road Initiative. Italy may be the first G7 country to join in when President Xi travels there later this month. So it is certainly something to take note of, and it is often described as the modern Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan obviously came in after the wreckage of World War II and tried to develop Europe, and China's Belt Road Initiative is meeting a need that the Asian Development Bank talks about. Just in Asia, development requires $1.7 trillion a year, something that China, the World Bank, everybody is not going to meet. But China's Belt Road Initiative is certainly the largest development project. What's its relevance when we talk just about this region? And let's define that as Central Asia and specifically from Central Asia to Azerbaijan. On the border between Kazakhstan and China is the largest dry dock facility in Khorbas, a huge switching station where rail cars from China are put on rail cars in Kazakhstan, and produce going back and forth, if it goes by land, it's quicker than by sea and much less expensive than by air. And the infrastructure that China is getting behind provides a great opportunity for these countries that want to be connected beyond their borders. Political change in Uzbekistan provides greater cooperation within Central Asia, and we've long been looking for ways of getting Afghanistan connected with the region. But you know, in Washington, every geostrategic leader that I have respect for always talks about the importance of Azerbaijan. And the late Zbigniew Brzezinski used to talk about Azerbaijan as the cork and Central Asia the bottle, and that Azerbaijan would unleash the riches of Central Asia to Europe. And with the Belt Road Initiative, there's that possibility of not just Central Asia's riches, but the riches beyond Central Asia on into China and beyond. But when just talking about road or rail traffic, one hopes that road and rail traffic is not moving from China to Europe with the cars full and going back from Europe to China empty. During the days of the Great Silk Road, it was silks and spices from China and gold from Europe. So there's a lot to think about as far as how the trade can be two ways. And interestingly, China, after decades, may for the first time have a current account deficit, which would be quite interesting and something quite different for for China to address. But there's great opportunities, and it puts Azerbaijan again right at the hub. President Aliyev mentioned yesterday the East-West corridor and the development of the port here and the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars Railroad. And these are all projects that can take advantage of China's Belt Road Initiative. But with the Marshall Plan in its day and with the Belt Road Initiative today, there's always controversy, and some of it well-deserved. And when people look at the Belt Road Initiative, there are certainly countries that are managing it well, and I think Kazakhstan is one that is a real winner in the Belt Road Initiative. I visited Laos. I visited there twice. I absolutely love Laos, but I don't know enough about Laos to speak about Laos. But there's other countries that have had a mixed experience. We're all familiar with Sri Lanka not being able to manage its debt and having to swap it for a 99-year lease on the port. Obviously, the loans to Malaysia became part of their own domestic politics, and $23 billion in loans with China were canceled. And in the recent election in Pakistan, every politician took credit for CPAC, which is to date the Belt Road Initiative's largest project at about $56 billion. But after the election, the new government had to look to Saudi Arabia, the IMF, and China to try and manage its finances. So some people suggest that it's not the one belt, one road, but it's one belt, one road, one country, and that win-win doesn't mean win-win, but that China wins twice. And they even suggest the idea of some sort of debt imperialism. I think that China really wants to get paid for the money that it loans out, and I don't think there's a grand strategy of debt imperialism. I think that it needs to learn from the errors that it's made, as we all do. And there's an opportunity for greater transparency and cooperation. I don't know the current discussions, but I know that Saudi Arabia was going to join with China, perhaps, in the Belt Road Initiative on some projects. And I think if there's other opportunities for that, it would make the Belt Road Initiative stronger if it was more multilateral. I think that it would help to, as I think just more experience with the lending outside of China will come, but I think that more best practices could also help the Belt Road Initiative be the success that China wants it to be, that Asia, the Middle East, and Africa need it to be, and I think that the development and moving people out of poverty could really take advantage of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. David. And it's seldom for me to listen to the views from American people about Belt and Road Initiative in such a positive way. Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Peter Rumen, a former Prime Minister of Romania. Romania is a very friendly and a traditional, we have a traditional friendship with Romania. Whatever the changes of the international situation or whatever the changes of governments, and China maintains the good relations with Romania. Now I give the floor to Mr. Peter Rumen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your kind words. Indeed, I entered the politics only during the Romanian Revolution, end of December 1999, and since then I'm a long-date friend of China. I've been witnessing various developments in China. I've been many times in China, speaking in China. And now I would like to tell you some of my latest thoughts. It's interesting. In November last year, New York Times presented an ample article headlined, "The American Dream is Alive, period, in China." In this article, many aspects of the Chinese developments were praised, and among them, first, the fact that almost 800 million Chinese people have risen out of poverty in 40 years. That is 2.5 times the entire population of the United States. Then, again last year, the Pew Research Center in Washington performed in 2017, as it did every year since 2008, a survey in 38 countries around the world on the question, which country is the dominant economic power in the world? In Canada, Australia, Russia, and 7 out of 10 developed countries from Europe, a majority believe it is China. For example, in Germany, China is the dominant power according to 41% of the people questioned. USA, only 21%. In France, for China, 47%. For USA, 37%. So China has done exceptionally well at building first-rate ports, highways, and railways. But China started to promote innovation as the priority of the new open-up phase of development. Today, China is in itself a world of innovation. Chinese spending on R&D, research and development, grew tenfold between 2000 and 2016. In a recent report, the OECD report on knowledge economies and the digital transformation, the top 10 most central IT hubs. In 1991, China didn't exist there in the top 10. And by far the most central was USA. In 2011, already, China was by far the most central in IT production, IT hubs. It is, I think, very important to acknowledge that the huge development achievements in China's economy were written domestically by the Chinese leadership. The fate of this economy nowadays is still in the hands of the Chinese leaders, but not as much as until now. The wisdom of the Chinese, I think, leadership consists precisely in acknowledging this new global environment. That is probably, at least partially, I think, the main original impulse towards the new Silk Road Initiative, or Belt and Road. And the revival of the Silk Road meant also that the new formal phobies and stereotypes towards China are properly taken into account by the Chinese leaders. The goals and priorities of the Belt and Road Initiative are subsumed to a geo-cultural strategy of China. We do not talk a lot about that. The political concepts of this vision are mutual trust and better understanding, which enhance, obviously, international cooperation. China understands clearly the cultural differences and is always willing to overcome entrenched prejudices and suspicions. Last year, together in a group of the members of the Club de Madrid, our President Vieira is here, the group was received by President Xi, and he told us a story of Chinese wisdom. Two good friends are fishing together on a boat in the splendid environment of a beautiful sunset. One tells to the other, "How happy are the fish in this lake?" And the other responds, "How do you know that you are not a fish?" Splendid wisdom. And President Xi added, "The voice of every nation has to be listened to." Wonderful phrase. Many political and analysts and economists in the West keep saying that for China, in order to keep the same path of rapid progress, or the new reform of the open up as the Chinese call it, China would be in need of a true renovation. They say critical thinking and obstinate truth-telling should be allowed to exist in China. As a former scientist, I certainly agree with this idea. Now, as a politician, I admire the results achieved so far by China and wonder if these tremendous results were possible while critical thinking and obstinate truth-telling were truly banned from within the political system. In China, the unappealable authority, as it called it, within the political system did well in the last 40 years in China. Can it deliver also from now on? Perhaps it can. Perhaps it cannot. And perhaps, and that is my feeling, the Chinese leadership will discover new ways of thinking and fruitful knowledge. We should remember that it is rooted in the Chinese philosophy, the search for harmony, that is, ideas, willpower, truth, and beauty together. So I'm rather optimistic because precisely of this quality of wisdom the Chinese always were ready to display for them and for the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Peter Roman. And you talk about Belt and Road Initiative from a unique angle. I appreciate, and especially your suggestions. I think it's very valuable. And our next speaker is Madame Jennifer Shipley, former Prime Minister of New Zealand. I was shocked this morning when I heard, the tragedy happened in your country. Today is the darkest day of your country and also the darkest day of the world. I just want to express my sympathy with your people and with your country. Now, Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, before I begin, if you'll allow me, I do want to acknowledge the 49 precious lives that were lost in New Zealand this morning. These were Muslim people, these were our people who were at prayer. And I appreciate the sympathy that many of you have extended. I want to join the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Prime Minister Ardern, in extending our sympathy to those who have lost precious people at home. But I personally want to extend the sympathy to the Muslim people around the world. This is a terrible, criminal, and mindless act. And when we come here today, I hope we can find resolve to find solutions that will, in due course, prevent this from happening. The question of China and its future development is compelling. My comments this afternoon, I don't want to repeat what others have already offered. But I want to simply make 2 or 3 observations that I've drawn together, having visited China many times over the last decade and a half. And we know that China's ability to set targets, make plans, and systematically deliver on them has delivered meaningful change. While many of us signed the Millennium Goals, China, in fact, delivered 76% of the poverty reduction that was achieved by those goals, which were globally celebrated. So what can we take from what China did that might be relevant going forward? And I put this in the context of, if we're serious about moving from 4 economies dominating more than half the world's GDP to a far more balanced set of economic countries that are experiencing success, there are elements that I think are worth considering. China made a very significant step in the early years of extending universal education to all children to the top of the primary level. In my opinion, the improvements of literacy rates are one of the greatest investments that China has made even to today's success, and I suspect it will lay a platform going forward for many years that will contribute to its ongoing success. The second thing I observe is that they systematically rolled out systems to establish connectivity. Some of you will recall the days when the telecommunications system literally, in a matter of about 2 years, went from very low levels of coverage to almost universal coverage of China. And so that ability, not only through telecommunications, but then road and then rail and then air, has systematically connected people to markets and markets to people that, in my opinion, have dramatically contributed to China's overall success. And it's very easy to generalize when we use the word China and the large numbers and similar size economies, but let me remind you that if you look at Guangzhou's economy of over 524 billion, it is actually equal to Switzerland. If you look at Beijing, it's 644 billion, it is equal to the UAE. If you look at Xi'an, smaller, but 161 billion, equal to Kenya. If you look at Shanghai at 810, equal to the Philippines. My point here is when we look at what's ahead of us in the world in the future, and we look at the scale of the development that is not just in small parts of China, but is spread across many, many large cities in China, there are many layers of success that if we then think about sharing them across the Belt and Road network or other areas of development, these systems of investment as opposed to aid, for example, are things we need to consider seriously. We should not be surprised that developing economies welcome China when their conversation is about investment, not small levels of aid that are conditional. And it's interesting that many of these economies have been prepared to move in a way that is shifting people forward. The next thing I've observed, and this is more recent in some of my work in the banking sector, is that the concept of inclusive finance may well be very important to the future. And this is happening both in China, but as we look at the Belt and Road and we wring our hands about debt, maybe it's a concept that rather than short-term rate of return, we need to think about what layers of finance, whether it's the Silk Fund, AIIB, the ADB, the commercial banks, who is prepared to take a position in an inclusive way if we are really committed to sustainable development across a far broader range. And while these conversations are in their infancy, they are areas that are critical if we are to make progress. I want to pull this down from global to local. Many of you will be familiar with China's more recent target of eradicating poverty in the very near future. And you might sit back and be skeptical. Well, I'll leave that to the future to prove whether or not they achieve that. But I was very struck in a piece of work I was looking at just last week in the case of Yunnan. Some of you will know the Yunnan province in the south, one of the slowest provinces to move ahead, and now as particularly the main cities experiencing rapid development. Cloud systems that have literally got populations in a 5G new industry environment where the Internet of Things is their daily experience. And they are able to say to poor farmers, we will lend to you based on your income, not your assets. This is revolutionary. Most of our economies won't lend you a cent unless they can secure it against your assets. In China, the e-platforms, whether it's Alipay or many of the other banking systems, can now work with individuals. And once they are in these banking systems, inclusive finance then extends them the opportunity to put their goods onto sales platforms, and others, because they believe it's their obligation to try and diminish poverty, are able to particularly buy from these suppliers, knowing that they are making a contribution to reduction of poverty. Now, you may say these are examples, but we have talked a lot about profit making as opposed to social inclusion, financial inclusion, and progress forward. In my own experience, whether I like it or not, there are many examples now that China has been able to demonstrate over the last 3 decades. And the degree of innovation that I see going on, I am absolutely sure that they are taking steps that, by rolling out modern networks that can support the Internet of Things, unless we think about these platforms in relation to development and connectivity and people sharing the rise, we will probably miss the opportunity and China will continue to move ahead. Mr. Chairman, nothing I've said seeks to diminish the complexity. There are complex matters that China and the US need to work on, but there are so many benefits as well, and I want to call out 2. I am deeply grateful as a former leader from a small country in terms of China's commitment to multilateralism. At a time where it's very easy for the small, developed or developing economies to be lost, we need to, if necessary, reform, but we must preserve what we've got and try and modernize and take this forward. And China, since it joined the WTO, has been a loyal and relatively disciplined participant in the multilateral system. I have great hopes that in the very near few weeks there'll be progress made in the disputes that are currently present, and I hope the G20 in Japan this year will see that these are matters not only for the big guys, but if they can be made to achieve progress, then the sustainability goals and progress for us all are genuine possibilities. My last comment around observation is planning it forward or playing it forward. We've heard a lot in the last few days about green technology and the risk to the planet. I was born in 1952 and there were 2.5 billion people on Earth. Today there are 7.5 billion. I admire, in retrospect, China's discipline around dealing with population. Now, it was extremely controversial when I was a young woman, but I lament the fact that the UN today can't even discuss the issue of population and the human footprint as a contributing factor to our ability to sustain our lifestyle on this earth. And I plead with those of you who are people of influence that while we may have held personal views that are keenly held, principally held, can we not afford to open our minds and perhaps allow, for example, every woman to be able to control when her babies are born? Because there's good statistical data that shows that that alone would contribute to climate control and the possibility that we will achieve these objectives. And so we can learn from China, not to replicate, but to acknowledge that there were some courageous calls made that we need to think about and how we take today's time and today's landscape forward and consider whether they are relevant. I, for one, while I don't agree with everything that I see in China, I am a great admirer of the achievements of China, and economies like ours have been successful because of China's success, and I hope that we'll find ways for that to continue in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Jennifer. Thank you for your vivid observation about China. Next speaker is Mr. Boris Tadich. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Chairman. And I want to express my condolences to Jennifer once again because of a tragic event that happened in New Zealand, which was considered as the safest country for many, many years. And this is a crystal clear evidence that we are living in the small world, vulnerable world, and also that we are still living in the epoch of prejudices and stereotypes and the very bad emotions. Which means even though we are very proud because of technological achievements, digitalization, new technologies, somehow one of the main characteristics of the mankind, even nowadays, are such a bad stereotypes, like it was during the tribals era, in the medieval, even before. Which means that the politics nowadays, multilateral institutions are facing with new challenges or challenges that are still affecting our civilization. In that respect, let me say a few things about China's role, which is changing after economic reforms in past 4 decades. That reform started in 1978, 1979, the end of this decade, which was characterized in international community with the other event considered very differently. That was the Tiananmen Square, an event in China in that time. For some politicians, that was a tragic event. For some politicians, that was something that they had to understand. But after that happened, which was a really challenge for China, Deng Xiaoping, who wasn't former leader of the country, was announcing reforms. Firstly, those reforms were reforms for China. But after 4 decades, we can understand that the vision of Deng Xiaoping is one of the main contributions to the mankind nowadays. Why I'm saying that? I will use the 2 examples and evidence of that statement. During the crisis 2008-2012, Chinese economy was a driving force of the economy in the world, contributing with 30% to the world development in that time. Without that contribution, effects of the crisis would be terrible. Second, during the 4 decades of reform, China was taking out 750 million people from poverty. Let me underline once again, after crisis and the wars in Africa, Iraq, Syria, and some problems in Central Asia, European Union has been affected by 5 million migrants, which created one of the most significant political crises in this beautiful continent. 5 million migrants are 1% of the population of European Union. Every country every entity with such strong economy can handle easily 1% of migrants that are coming from abroad, even European Union. But this is a crystal clear evidence how stereotypes, bad emotions, and prejudices are very dangerous, even for very stable and strong economies and states. If we are taking into account that during the 4 decades, China was taking over from the crisis 750 million poor people. Can you imagine the world nowadays if China wasn't able to implement reforms that are looking for a chance to live better outside of China. Hundreds and hundreds million of refugees. Only 5 million of refugees from Syria, Iraq, Central Asian country, totally destroyed structure of European Union. Can you imagine reality nowadays in the case without reforms implemented in China in the past 4 decades? This is why I think that Mr. Deng Xiaoping, who implemented reform, who wasn't leader formally in that time, is one of the most respectable person in the history of 20th century for the mankind. Even though we didn't share views about Tiananmen with him at the end of 1970s. When I was on some forum in China, one of the most important issues for us living in Europe and the Western communities was always issue of human rights. And one of my Chinese friends was treating this issue from a very different angle by saying, okay, you always focus on the human rights and starting to analyze that very important issue from your angle, living in a very rich country. But for us, was the main topic by solving issue of the human rights, how to take over poor people from poverty. And our achievement in that respect, comparing what you are saying about the rights of the mankind, is much better. Look what you are doing with the refugees right now in your countries, how you are treating them. I am not underestimating the issue of the human rights, but I would like to be provocative right now and to point out that question to all of us and to consider that issue very seriously, because if we are ignoring differences between cultures, differences in terms of the economic development, reality in which we are living, we cannot be very serious in preventing problems that are coming. We are facing with the challenges. I admire what China achieved. I really admire it. This is fantastic contribution to the new epoch. But at the same time, every country which is achieving a lot is facing with oscillations. Like it was in China in the beginning of reforms. Without intervention of Deng Xiaoping in the end of 1970s in South China, reforms would be in a very difficult situation. He encouraged market orientation of this country. And after that, they achieved a lot. But nowadays, China is facing with a challenge. Not only United States, whether China is take over a role of the big power like it was with Russia and the United States in the past. Is China, which is going to be the main economic power, maybe China is already the main economic power, but in next 10 years is going to be for sure the biggest and the largest economy in the world, is going to take the same habit and same approach regarding multinational institutions, multilateral institutions, and global politics. We know that United States and the Western countries has been behaving very specifically regarding the other countries and the other world. I'm not talking about Africa and the colonization. I'm not talking about only about using international financial institutions to implement, to impose the new rules of so-called globalization of economy, even though we can see right now that China is more in favor of globalization than the United States in the new conditions, when China is taking over first position in terms of volume of economy. But this is a very important question, whether China is going to keep the role of the soft power in the future. I truly believe only in the soft power position of the main political forces. This is very important. When we talked with the President Xi Jinping, he have said a few months ago, China is a still developing country, which is a good statement. But China nowadays is able to produce cheaper and more efficient aircraft carrier than before. Whether China is going to be only contributor to development or conquer like many biggest power in the world in the past, this is one of the main questions. I believe that China is going to keep that very reserved position and to insist on contribution, not domination. That will be very important, contribution, not domination. Otherwise, we are going to be faced altogether with a new problem we cannot solve. I hope that is going to be strategy. And this is why I truly believe that initiative, One Belt, One Road, is that kind of contribution to the new history of mankind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tadic. As a politician, you expressed your foresight about the development of China and the contribution made by China to the world. I particularly appreciate your thoughts and views about the human rights. I think your idea is enlightening. It's very unique. Our next speaker is Mr. Danilo Turk, former president of Slovenia. Mr. Turk, he is also the senior fellow of one of the famous university, that is the People's University. Now I give the floor to Mr. Turk.
Thank you, Professor Wu, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to say a few words about the development, China's development and opportunities for the world. This is the question which was addressed to this panel. And as I was thinking about how could one respond to this question with one word, I would say China's development has started to transform the world. It has a transformative power. And that transformation is something we are living through, we have to adjust to, and we have to take advantage of. That is the simple answer to the question of how China's development creates opportunities for the world. Now, obviously, every transformation brings questions, further questions, and there is a lot of debate, and I think that it is useful to look at that debate this afternoon. Just one example, a debate about G5 smartphone technology. It's interesting to follow that debate. I'm not a technological expert, but I see clearly a difference between arguments that are made by many, not all, but many political people who are expressing doubts, and then people from the business community and technology side who are much more positive about G5. And who would say, well, you know, this is a new opportunity brought up by China's development, which is really the most developed technology in the world right now, and we have to take advantage of it. Now, obviously, this controversy can be brought to the level of practical decisions. And it might be perhaps interesting to know that the city of Vienna has already decided to take G5 technology as the platform for developing Vienna into a smart city for the rest of the century. Now, Vienna doesn't wait for political discussions to be sorted out one way or another. Vienna has understood that opportunity is there and has to be seized. And I think that that's an interesting and important example which should lead us to think about every aspect of contributions that China is making to the global transformation. Another element which I think is close to everybody in this room, I think everybody in the world, is the whole discussion of Belt and Road Initiative. And there, obviously, the central idea of Belt and Road has been from start the concept of connectivity, that all those participating should be better connected. This is a wonderful idea. But I'm not sure whether we all understood from start the enormous potential that that idea has, because we are not talking only about ports and railways, the most immediate ideas of connectivity. We are talking about, obviously, internet, also about water management, which becomes a greater possibility if the whole investment process in the context of Belt and Road is properly directed. And we also talk about something that is actually quite often discussed in China, and in many of my meetings in China was actually the first thought, and that was greening of Belt and Road. Greening. Using the opportunity of this increased investment by China in these large areas to bring into the picture new technology for generation of energy and for better protection of environment. A wonderful idea, not fully explored, and I think that the Nizami Ganjawi Center would do a good job in its next meeting, see if greening of Belt and Road was also made one of the topics to be discussed in our meetings here. Now, Belt and Road obviously has a variety of applications and works in a variety of ways in Europe, and of course, since I'm coming from a European country, a small European country, also a member of European Union, much thinking is now developing around this. Now, Slovenia is one of the countries involved in the 16+1 framework, and we obviously participate in those discussions as well. And as everybody knows, 16+1 was seen as a slightly controversial idea in parts of the European Union, because it was said, all right, this is now taking some members of the European Union and some non-members of the European Union into a single framework to discuss cooperation with China. I think that by now it has been understood already that the part of Europe which is now in the focus of 16+1 has been lagging behind in investment, and therefore there is every reason that somewhat more enhanced approach is taken to that part of Europe. What is less understood is that the big advantage of the formula 16+1 is in the fact that it brings into a single cooperative framework countries that are in the European Union and those who are not. Now, this is, I think, connectivity. We need to be better connected. We need to work beyond divisions. In Europe, we are used to criticize divisions from the past, the Cold War divisions. Now, those divisions are over, but new divisions are emerging, and we have to be very careful and use every opportunity to overcome such divisions between EU countries and non-EU countries. And it is very good that China is providing us with one of the opportunities to overcome such new emerging divisions. Now, I should not leave you with an impression that I wish to criticize European Union in this context. I'm just saying that European Union is also learning in this big transformational process, and that European Union is also confronted with options which include much more intense cooperation with China. One of them relates to the World Trade Organization, and Jenny Shipley has spoken about this. I would like to say a few words more. It was interesting to watch the development of last year, 2018, from the point of view of relationship between European Union and China. In the middle of that year, there was a legal proceeding established by EU against China with regard to technology and investment. And that, of course, led to consultations, as they call that process in the World Trade Organization. At the same time, at the summit between China and the European Union, it was agreed that there will be a joint working group to look at the WTO. And then, as a result of that, the two parties came very close together to the questions of some elements of reform of WTO in the field of dispute settlement. So as you can see, the transformational power of China works in really very interesting ways. It offers an opportunity for cooperation on matters where EU interests, the interests of European Union and China converge to a very high level. So we have this very high level of convergence of interest and the need to work together for improvement of the global system. By saying this, I'm not underestimating the dangers of the current complications between China and United States. But we live in a world which is not bipolar. We live in a world where there is a multitude of actors. And those actors can come together in different combinations. And if we are wise enough and have enough foresight, I'm sure we can take advantage of these opportunities. We can take advantage of working together between European Union, China, other actors within the G20 context in Japan later this year and later, to work out a global trading system which will be beneficial to everybody. And I'm not talking only about trading goods, I'm talking also about services, about intellectual property, about all other economically important elements that are covered by the World Trade Organization. So I would like to conclude on this optimistic note. The world is more complicated, but the transformational effect of China is offering so many new opportunities that we absolutely have to take advantage of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turk, for your observation about Belt and Road Initiative, and particularly you talk about how to strengthen the cooperation between China and the European Union and other countries. Ladies and gentlemen, we have our last speaker, that is the young and intelligent professor from the Chinese People's University. Now I give Professor Mr. Wang Wen the floor. Please.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Wang Wen. I'm from China, a think tank scholar. And thank you for having me today. In the past 2 days, I'm really learned a lot from my senior generation. But as a scholar from a think tank, I have to share very simple 2 points to you. First point is that the potential of China development. What the potential now, I think, it's much, much bigger than the past 40 years since the Deng Xiaoping reform and opening up policies. Why am I talking about that? Because I want to share the very interesting database, a few databases to you. In China now, there are over 1 billion, listen, 1 billion Chinese people never take a plane. You can imagine. 1 billion Chinese people never take a plane. In China, there are around 500 million people have no toilet. I mean the closed door at home. You cannot imagine. In China, there are over 90% Chinese people never go overseas. You can never imagine. Why I'm talking about that? I just want to say I appreciate my senior generations all talking about China achievement. But in the future, in order to satisfy those people's daily life, those people's improving the living standard, that will produce the huge opportunities, economic growth opportunities. So that's what I want to say. But the problem is that, even that, China still faces very, very big difficulties. So if you ask me whether you feel optimistic or pessimistic about China's future, I want to say both. Feel very pessimistic for short term of China's development, but very, very optimistic for the middle and long-term Chinese development. Why is talking about that? That is why Chinese central government now, we have the 3 campaigns. One campaign is anti-pollution. One is anti-poverty. Even you are talking about poverty reduction, but now in China, there are still 20 million poor people. 20 million poor people, that's similar to one European country's population. So third campaign is that the anti-crisis, so including the anti-corruption and the anti-financial crisis. This is the main mission of our now President Xi's administration. So that's the first point I want to share. That's a potential. Second is like I want to share is a prediction. So I'm a think tank scholar. I'm very lucky. I have the many chance to touch with a lot of Chinese officials. Every year, maybe I have over 100 times to invite it to a lot of insight conference by the ministry. But, because a lot of people talking about in past today, talking about China's future's international leadership or global leadership. But I have to say, as in the scholars' perspectives, in China, no one, no official, no inside conference talking about global leadership. China want to be. China don't want to be. China doesn't want to be the second American, second U.S. China doesn't want to be the second Soviet Union. But what China want to do? China want to do our own path, which is learning by doing, because we know the global system is very, very complicated, very, very complicated. We just do, and we just learn by doing. This is what want to say. And the problem is that, but even that, because so many people talking about BRR, BRR initiate, what does the BRR want to do? But BRR just want to share the China's international experience, because China has a lot of very useful and pragmatic development experience. Not only poverty reduction, but also, for example, infrastructure. Mr. Turk talking about 5G. In China, you know, the smartphone is very, very, very useful for most of the younger generations in their daily life. They never use cash. They just use one smartphone can solve everything in 1 month, in whole year. Why we don't share the experience to the world? A lot of experience, but China don't want to be the world hegemony or international hegemony or new so-called global leader like US did. So I think my final remark is that this year is a very interesting year because it's a 70th anniversary of the new China. Also, it's a 30 years anniversary of a very interesting theory, the end of history. 30 years ago, a very famous American professor, Francis Fukuyama, he published a very interesting article talking about the end of history. My final remark is that we just wait and see. The history is not ending. The new history is just beginning. And future, we don't know. We just learning by doing, and learning everyone, and learn each other, and respect each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wang. Since time is running, I just give one chance to the audience. Just now I saw Dr. Aziz raise his hand. Now I gave the floor to Dr. Aziz. Yeah, please. Microphone, please. They are not prepared, huh?
No mics. Oops. Sorry to barge in on the stage. As many of you know, ladies and gentlemen, the One Belt, One Road initiative launched by China. Pakistan was one of the pilot countries. And I apologize that I didn't sign up. I thought we'd have mics and I would get a chance, but I apologize. So anyway, this will be a true game changer for the world and for us, Pakistan. Let me say that the concept behind it is largely about connectivity. If you can improve the connectivity of any country, any marketplace with the rest of the world, you generate tremendous economic activity. That can be manifested in many ways. It can be roads, it can be railways, it can be sea lanes, and it can be air connections. Also, connectivity means digital connectivity also. Networks, telecommunications, data flows, all that is and can be part of the One Belt, One Road. I negotiated at length with your government, sir, and your cabinet members on what we should do in Pakistan. This has really taken off. There are different views. Pakistan has an active opposition. Parliament is very active. So you will hear comments occasionally about this or that. But the truth is that when I first started negotiations with then Premier Zhu Rongji. It was not called One Belt, One Road, but the concept, and we talked about Gwadar Port. This is the fastest project we could complete ever in the history of Pakistan. That port is now a reality. It's a hub for Pakistan. It has opened our access to Iran and many other countries in the Gulf. And this would be a game changer for Pakistan too. So I don't want to take much of your time, except to say that look at it holistically. No country, by the way, can force another country to undertake a project or an initiative. It has to have ownership. And in our case, because there's parliament and there's all sorts of checks and balances, we went through all that. And we passed all the tests, and now people even who at the first initiative said, oh my God, will we be taken over, et cetera, nothing of the sort. Let me also say that diplomatically, our relationship with China is the strongest we have with any country in the world in the P5 or in the top countries. And we are proud of it. And never have they tried to influence policy. Never have they ever told us, this is what you do and you don't do. Now, the gentleman from the State Department, former, just talked about Pakistan and its political parties. Yes, we have people with lots of different views. I was in government only 8 years, but I can say that every day I was answering such comments. The fact is, there's always room for improvement in any initiative you take. I have a lot of respect for the US too, and we have a lot of projects with them too. But in this case, let me assure the audience that people are now seeing the benefits of what this was all about. And when you Google it in terms of Pakistan projects, you'll get a lot of information on what has happened. So if you can encourage more of connectivity to take place in the world, whether it comes from China or from somewhere else, you will find the dividends will be tremendous, and the growth and the advantage of growth will spread to areas which didn't have connectivity, because you will be opening new markets and new access to all these places. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Dr. Aziz, for your splendid and encouraging remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, according to the schedule, we have to immediately to finish this panel discussion. I know, many people want to speak, but maybe we have another chance next time. Well, this afternoon, altogether 9 + 1 panelists share their views and thoughts about China from different perspectives. Well, the panelists, on one hand, spoke highly of the achievements made by China, and on the other hand, they also pointed out the problems and the challenges China faces at the present and future. Generally speaking, through these panel discussions, I have the impression that China's development is an opportunity instead of a threat or a problem for the nation and for the world. China should also take China should also take a more opportunity in the reform and the opening up. China should bear more responsibilities and make more contribution to the world community. Belt and Road Initiative is a platform of international cooperation. It benefits the development of the partners and the international community. It should be further strengthened. I think these are the impression this panel discussion left to me as a moderator. Lastly, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the panelists for their contribution and their inputs for this panel discussion. I also like to thank the audience for their participation, their patience, and their attention. Thank you. Thank you very much.